Welcome to another episode of Come Together. Tim Pickens, welcome to the show. I'm so
All
happy
right,
to have you
thanks.
here.
Yeah.
And I wish we were just recording for the last hour, but we will keep it up because, like I've said more than once so far, your reality is, I think, science fiction, at least for me, but if not for 95 or more percent, I would imagine,
Wow.
of people out there. You take the word rocket science and bring it to a lot of different places. So I want to just kind of let you go and tell me a little bit about what you've done in your free time and what you've done in your professional time that is really just what's so incredible. I mean, it's so cool.
Well, thanks for having me on. This is, I don't do a lot of these, but it's kind of fun to talk about the weird stuff, the real stuff, and maybe the weird real stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, well, we'll get there. We'll get there.
The weird real stuff. I don't know, but I've worked, doing space exploration, trying to lower the cost to get people to space for my most of my adult life. I dreamed about it before then, but I just didn't think I'd really had the brain power to really make a difference. Probably didn't believe in myself, and to be honest, kind of fell into just taking classes and kind of just doing my own thing, learning. My whole home's a library of technical books, but everything's applied. Most everything I have is, if it doesn't say applied, I would rather give it away because it's probably going to be above my head. So we got to build stuff. But I'll tell you, it's been an incredible journey, and it started with just me wanting to make a difference in the industry and found some friends, and I decided I was gonna buy a lathe, a metal lathe, and a milling machine, and start buying NASA valves because I wanted the good stuff. I'd go to sales, and I started inviting friends over, and we got together with a space club, and next thing you know, 2 nights a week, we're building a rocket to put a little critter in space, and we wanted to hit 50 miles, and
No way.
we used the balloon, used a big balloon, and, next thing you know, 3 years later, we're flying them off the coast of the Atlantic. You got a question?
Who's we? How'd you find these people? Most people in this world cannot find a group of people, I think, to hang out with a couple of times a week. And also, I was shocked, and I've only heard this recently as the news wave has hit, but you live in a particular part of the world that is that has a high concentration of people that are interested in the same thing as you are.
That's right. He's, more per capita, I think, anywhere in the country is Huntsville, Alabama. So it is the Rocket City. I was born there when I was born in '64, and there were probably about 50 or 60,000 people there. Now there's well over 1,000,000 people, and I think you said you visited up there.
Yeah, couple of
So
breweries.
it's just a different place. I'd go to the Space and Rocket Center all the time, and a lot, and I would think, "Wow, why is this stuff so expensive, man? How are we gonna make a difference? How could I make a difference?" And it just bummed me out that we had a museum full of stuff that probably could have flown. And it was like, "Are you kidding? This is crazy. We'll kill a program, then we'll go do something else. Politics, we'll kill another one." And it's like, this is not sustainable, and I really wanted to make a difference. So this rocket to space, the first amateur space shot, we hit 36 miles in about 2 years, by the way. That was the
Wow.
highest. We got in the Guinness Book of World Records, 2000 Millennium
And
Edition.
what's space
We
considered?
That was 50 miles high. The
Space is
international
50 miles.
definition is 62 miles, 100 kilometers.
Okay,
But we were
gotcha. So
going
you
for the
almost
U
made it.
we almost, but it was the highest, so the Guineas picked it up, and we didn't push Guineas to do that, it just showed up. The point is, we learn how to build stuff from nothing, out of the trash can. I mean, this is where I come up with the idea of the nitrous oxide and the asphalt fuel. I'm talking roof and tar. That became the propellant, and everybody's like, "Are you kidding?" Normally, we'd use this rubber called HTPB. It's kinda like rubber from, like a pencil eraser. This is what they use with the oxidizer in it to make solid
Mhm.
rocket motors. But this is typical. I said, let's try asphalt because it's got a lot of energy in it. and they make plasticizers. I already looked it up. We can make it where it's real rubbery, and they do that to make sure it doesn't crack on roofs. And I said, "There's a lot of data." And I said, "Let's." My wife's a chemistry major, and I said, "How much energy is there in in an ounce or gram?" And she said, "Are you kidding?" She says, "Thermal chemistry, that's not my thing." She's organic. Anyways, she didn't wanna talk about it, so I had to start learning some math and chemistry, and I'm digging, and I'm thinking, "Oh gosh, this is so heavy, man." The next thing you know, I'm doing thrust measurements with force gauges, and I'm learning instrumentation. I'm doing testing in my front yard, making a lot
What do
of
your parents
noise.
think?
Oh, yeah, man, I've got smoke coming out of the yard, and the neighbor's asking, "Am I okay?" And I've got a chart recorder with pins, and it's taking the data, and I'm getting the thrust under the curve, and I'm I'm chopping it up and putting it in Excel, and my brother-in-law, who's a physicist, he comes by and says, "Oh, you're working on some calculus." I said, "No, I'm just integrating these little areas here." He said, "Well, that's what you're doing, and here's the real equation." And I'm like, "Oh, I don't wanna get into all that math." And then when stuff blew up and burned up, I thought, "Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to learn about materials and hoop strength and stress." And the next thing but the thing is, there was this group of people that loved the National Space Society. They'd have monthly speakers. So
Mhm.
the guy that was running it, he said, "We've got about $10,000 left over from a National Space Society. We had a big convention here, and he said, we'd love to do that amateur space shot." I said, "Well, I've got some ideas for rockets where we won't kill ourselves with making solid rocket propellant. If something went south, we'd have a big fireball." So you got a question?
Yeah, real quick, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
To clarify, right, in case anyone doesn't understand, what's a typical way that rocket propellant is used, or what's it typically made of, and what was unconventional about the way that you were going about it?
Okay. Well, you can make fireworks, by the way, in your house, just like you'd buy at a fireworks stand, and you might have a little ball rocket, and that may have nothing more than black powder in it, just like
Mhm,
the old muskets. And it's basically has an oxidizer. That would be like potassium nitrate fertilizer,
mhm.
and they would have a sulfur and a little bit of charcoal. That's the ingredients, and that's pretty much what solid rocket motors are. When you see them firing them at different people, different countries, it's this stuff, rubber. But it's when it's still gooey and rubber before it cures, they mix oxidizer in, and that could be fertilizer. By the
I
way,
see.
ammonium nitrate is another one, but potassium nitrate, so that's a solid rocket motor. Once you light it, you can't cut it off. You're
Mhm.
committed. If you're making a bunch of this in your house, in your garage, in the neighborhood, and we have a spark, guess what? We may not make it.
Right.
This thing's trying to update. Hold on later. Okay, sorry. So yeah, this is how they do solids, and the BATF and everyone was getting freaked out about people and terrorism, and they didn't want people buying rockets. Well, I said, "Well, why don't I did steam rockets, by the way. I did big steam rockets in my driveway before I ever wanted to go to space. I was firing a big engine, and it would just be steam all throughout the front yard, and I'm sitting there with my chart recorder, and I'm integrating all this data, and I flew that rocket. It weighed about 55 pounds. I flew it to 2,000 feet several times. And I'm the guy that would come out with the little kids that they got the SDs, and I'm hauling around a generator, pails of water, and this 15-foot tall rocket. And they're like, "We don't know if this is sanctioned." And I'm like, "I'm only gonna go 1,000 feet maybe." And I'll tell you, I freak people out, and I didn't even think I said, "It's just water, it's just we're not gonna go out there once we make steam." So, anyways, I really got in deep, man. I went in from SD's rockets from Walmart or Kmart to bigger rockets. So, because of this this stuff can kill you if you have a batch go off. What I did is I said, "We gotta come up with something different." That's where the nitrous oxide and the asphalt fuel, so you keep them separated. Nitrous is in its own tank like the racers use, race cars,
Okay,
and then we have the asphalt over there in this rocket motor case,
okay.
and with all that, you have the 2 separated, so you don't have an oxidizer mixed with it until you open a valve. In fact, I'll show you a piece of hardware real quick. In
And
fact,
And
This
opening the valve allows the 2 to mix, and then when they mix, that's where the
yeah,
energy comes from?
this is one of
Wow.
our club rocket motors. That's the nozzle. That's an igniter up in there. This is full of asphalt, and this is where the nitrous comes into this hole right here.
Wow. And then where's the lever in the middle? Or where's
The
the lever that allows you to separate them?
the
Or to bring them
This
together, I
is
mean.
all nitrous in a tank way up above this.
Oh, I
Nitrous is
see.
way up. The nitrous is about a 10-foot long tank attached to this.
Okay, I
But
see.
there is a pyro valve I designed in here. So when you light that igniter and that pressure right there is nitrous, it'll blow that valve open and it'll auto ignite this. And this puts out about 800 pounds of thrust for 30 seconds. But
And wh how fa
we built this in
Yeah.
my garage, man. This is homemade rockets. This one was to go to 62 miles, over 62, but we had some problems. But, I'll put that away, sorry. I got
No,
a lot of
no,
show
no,
and
that's
tell.
that's awesome. That's awesome.
But anyways, I really got into this and I wanted to put one on my bicycle, man. I wanted to ride that power, feel that little hand of God pushing me down the road. So I did, man. A buddy, Glenn, the guy I hired to be my first technician, we built one and the fuel was plexiglass. Just a piece of plexiglass with a hole drilled down the middle with a little injector, a little hole, and we'd spray the nitrous in and it would light it. We'd have to light it with like with a sparkler. You ever play with a sparkler when you're a kid?
Sure, sure,
So
sure.
you light them and you shove it up the nozzle, and then you open the nitrous valve, and then it starts lighting, and you blow that sparkler out, and you have a thrust. And it was like
Wow.
about 40 pounds of thrust. So we were riding it down the neighborhood, and we were getting it down through there. And then later, I built a faster one that would do 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. And
On a bike.
it was asphalt with nitrous, and then with
Wow.
then the so, eventually all this club rocket stuff went on from 1994 to 2000.
Hey, everyone, real quick, if you're enjoying the show, click subscribe and rate the show 5 stars. Helps a ton. Thanks so much.
And a guy came to town named Burt Rutan, who was looking he was an airplane expert. He's had lots of planes in the Smithsonian, and it was all
Mhm.
composite. He's like, "I'm bored with airplanes. I wanna go to space." And I'm at this event in 1999 at a little bitty airport, and I said, "I'd like to talk to you about cheap, low-cost rocket motors." And he said, "Good, we're looking for people in Huntsville. You rocket people, you are the people I need." He said, "I can't have NASA build it because it costs more than the program, because we only got 25 million to do a program eventually." But this man right here came to Huntsville, Burt Rutan, that's me,
Wow.
and he
I love
came
that
in
picture.
'99 saying, "I'm bored with airplanes." This is the same guy that built the plane to fly around the world nonstop called Voyager. The
Amazing.
Made history, it's hanging in Smithsonian. You see that? That's the spaceship. That's the mothership to drop it from 55,000 feet. That man right there started talking to me, and we started exchanging emails and ideas.
And
Free. I
he
never thought
walked up to you or you walked up to him? How'd
I
you meet him
went
again?
afterwards, I just said, "Hey, I play with rockets." We did a balloon launch. I said, "We did a couple of them. We
Right.
did one at the Gulf of Mexico. We were on a NASA barge 200 miles out with a balloon with a homemade rocket, and it fell off the balloon and hit the deck, and it like almost exploded. It was that nitrous. It was horrible. But we're doing this as weekend warriors, amateurs, not getting paid. NASA loaned us the barge because they wanted to see how you might do balloons and rockets. No kidding. Marshall Space Flight Center. So this is one of those programs you'll never hear much about, but
Marshall Space Flight what is it called? The Marshall what?
Marshall Space Flight Center. It was a we called the balloon rocket a rockoon. Rocket and a balloon, rockoon. So we were the raccoon buffoons because we dealt with rockets and balloons, and it was horrible. But we launched the first one out of Topsail Beach up there in the Carolinas where the Wright brothers flew. We launched from right
Wow.
there. That's the one that went to 36 miles. But anyway, eventually he said he called me one day in 2020, about almost 2021. He said, "Hey, I'm funded. Paul Allen's funding my program." He said, "I want you to come work for me and lead my rocket engine development."
And who's Paul Allen, sorry?
Paul Allen is the co-founder of Microsoft with Bill Gates.
Wow.
He's
And so
he's a billionaire. Seattle Seahawks. He owned them. He died now, but he said I need you out here in 2 weeks. And I said, Bert, I said, there's a lot smarter rocket people than me. I said, go find you a PhD, find you someone. He said, Tim, he said, I've seen your rocket bike. I saw your rocket pickup truck in your garage when I visited you. And he also flew me around in a couple of places and said, do you mind if I pay you to go with me and look at some technology? And so I did that on my vacation.
What was that like? Can you talk
Uh,
about that at all? Or you're not allowed to?
I can, sure, there's nothing I can talk about anything. It's all happened
Okay,
in
great.
2004. But the, it was weird because people knew that I was into hybrid rockets, and we're going to see some hybrid company. One of them was right down there in Miami near where you are. It was
Yeah?
called EAC. It was owned by a guy named Kevin Smith, who had about 300 patents or more on medical devices. You ought to go
Wow.
look him up. He passed away. He used to live down there in Biscayne Bay and had a big ship out in front of his yard. That was Kevin. But that company he had was called EAC, Environmental Aero Corporation, I think. But he had lots of companies. So he did a lot of one-offs for Johnson Johnson, and they're still going. Some of the guys down there, Derek DeVille and some others that are still making medical devices. You might run across them in some of your circles. But we went down there. They were glad to see me because Burt didn't have them on the list. And I said, Burt, some of the most creative guys, Corey Klein, are right there in Miami. He said, will you fly with me down there? And I said, okay. And we went down and we met, and Kevin had a personal chef, and we're right there on Biscayne Bay, and they get into it. Two alpha personalities cussing each other out. Kevin saying, we're the only ones that could do this for you, Rutan. Everybody else are clowns. And, so it was just a disaster. So it was entertaining because I'm not in the fight. I'm just eating the good food and watching the but anyway, I remember Bert said, "All you GD this rocket guys all think you're the only people who could do this." It was not good, but we ultimately used them after a little competition. We used them for pieces of it. When I
I
say
see.
I led the development, nobody had ever built a big motor to fly people, none of these companies. And of course, I ride them on my truck and I've done a lot, but still none of these companies had the capability to do a big rocket motor. None of them. Well, we took that on in-house and they ended up saying, "We'll do the fuel. We'll do the rubber fuel like this. We'll put the fuel in it and compete for the performance, for the gas mileage." Anyways, I tried to get out of this deal, man. It was just fate. I couldn't. Bart's like, man, I can't hire an NASA guy. They'll make this thing cost $1 billion. I need someone
This is
scrappy.
said?
We got 25 million to do the entire program. That
And what year
includes
was this?
2002.
So there wasn't
Now
any
it flew in
SpaceX or Blue Origin or
2004.
anything?
Well, it flew in 2004 is when it all went up. And then
But
it was
who were the
hanging
other
in the
players in the game?
other players were really no serious players. There were a lot of companies that claimed they were gonna be able to do it, but it was just, Burt was the top dog. He was a
Mhm.
real funded guy. Plus, he's done a lot of airplanes, man. I mean, like I said, this is just another crazy Rutan day here. That's his
It's crazy
mothership. They
looking.
call this
It's
the
so cool.
mothership. That plane would go to 55,000 feet and drop this spaceship, and we'd light that motor and go
Wow.
over 62 miles high. Incredible. And by the way, this is crazy cowboy stuff, man. I mean, there ain't no spacesuits. This is
Well, how is this allowed? How is anyone willing to take the risk?
exactly. It's how are we? You don't ever ask people, can you do stuff? You try to comply with the laws
If they end up in
and
a prison cell.
you skate around permits, but look at the risk of what Paul Allen, a billionaire, is putting on the line to do this.
Yeah,
To fly people and you're gonna do what? Fire that engine 10 times on the ground, and then you're gonna go put
yeah,
a man in it on national TV?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's a guy we were talking earlier about people that aren't scared of anything, people that just jump in
mhm.
spite of, their $1 billion. They're gonna do it.
It's part of the reason a lot of times why they even have that $1 billion to begin with, is
Absolutely.
because they don't have they don't have that same type of fear of risk that most people have, and I think that also a certain part of you has to be able to just turn off your brain for a minute and just be like, all my instincts that are yelling at me are just protective and survival instincts. I'm not, we're not here to survive. We're here to live, as they say in Wall-E, in the great in the great movie Wall-E. But it's true, and it's something that comes to mind during your whole story so far, and I've lamented this on a couple of podcasts recently, is that Americans kind of forgot how to be cowboys in a lot of ways. And we've become tame and we've become comfortable and we've become confident in ourselves, overconfident in ourselves, I believe. And there's something, the combination of intelligence, perseverance, and play, those
Yes,
three
sir.
factors
Yes,
that
sir.
is so valuable, and if you take out the play of that from that, you lose. So the play is absolutely necessary, and you know what? And that's why you have enormous success from people that do value creativity over anything, you know?
Yes, sir.
I look at the entertainment world, which is the world that I kind of most comfortable, I guess, talking about, but Taylor Sheridan has a blank checkbook with Paramount. Why? Because
Mm.
he takes creative risks that are so good every time that they're no longer considered risks, right? He's balanced between that intelligence and the talent and the play, and I think so few people have that, but that's what's so much fun about hearing your story is that this is an old American spirit as far as I'm concerned, and I think it's something that we need revived, and I think it's something we need brought back.
We absolutely is nothing like it. To be in the right stuff movie is what I'm doing. I mean, it's in 1947, here it is, 2004, and we've got a guy climbing in this thing we built in a few months.
Mhm.
And he's gonna go get dropped from 55,000 feet on a brand new airplane using 2 jet engines he bought off the freaking eBay from jet engine car guys. These jet engines, J85s, afterburners, these weren't certified for anything. This is experimental plane, by the way, completely.
Mhm.
And Burt always said, by the way, he said when we get our paychecks, he'd be like, "Wow, we get paid for this? Man, this is so much fun. I should be paying y'all." So back to the fun and the keeping that kid alive inside of you. It is so important to keep everybody just fired up about the mission. And he also said, "Guys, you know you're doing real research when half the people on the program don't believe it will work." He said, "Now keep that in mind." And he said, "Most of you engineers will think it's the other guy's stuff that won't work."
Yeah, yeah,
And that's the way
yeah.
I felt about the engine. I'm like, "Well, but you gotta remember I've got the guys that are gonna fly this and said, Pickens, you know we always buy our engines, don't you? We don't make
Mhm,
'em. We buy
mhm.
our power plants from Pratt& and Whitney, Rolls-Royce, or whoever." And you're like, "Okay." But they seriously were like, "Okay, the guy with the bicycle who wrote it out on the flight line," Burt wanted me to bring it out. He said, "That's gotta be right ridden up and down the flight line." And of course, the tower called and said, "You boys need to get off the flight line with your rocket belt. C-130s you're running under are quite expensive." True story. But that's the fun factor. It was all about, we didn't this thing is like 12,000 pounds of thrust, by the way, that coming out of the back of this. And here I
Mhm.
am with a little 200-pound thrust rocket bike, and that's as close as they're gonna get to what we're doing until we fire a full-size motor on the ground. People would take anything they can get to kind of fill their gap of like, what is this gonna be like? So even a rocket bike was entertaining and it's like it's the same propellant we're using, y'all.
Yeah.
So you're right. I mean, guys like Paul Allen and even Elon, they've made their billion. Do it again. So if they lose it all, they're gonna go do something else, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they're at that point where they're willing to take the risk. And by the way, Elon did not be successful with his satellite launch or his rockets till I think it was 2008 or 9. Now we did ours in 2004. Because it was Paul Allen, people started pouring investment into commercial space. That's where it kicked off. It
And
wasn't Elon by himself. It was 2004, this spaceship.
I bet, yeah. Well, certainly, there needs to be a trailblazer. Someone needs to give permission. There has to be one guy that says it's crazy enough that it just might work, that is credible, there's always that one person that can kind of change the tide, and it's incredible what the power of one man with a little bit of influence can do, or one woman, obviously, but one human with a little bit of influence can do. Because I think, and I've noticed this on a anecdotal level, especially as from a teacher's perspective, that, and also as a father, I've noticed even with my 3-year-old and 1-year-old, less with my 1-year-old, but when you show that there are high expectations because you know that they're capable of more,
Yes.
people will very often rise up to the occasion. But if you set the bar low and make it easy to exceed standards, then people are very comfortable just settling for comfort, accolade, good enough. And I think that when you see someone, a billionaire, someone grounded like in Microsoft, someone that is in a more, that's an industry that I think a lot of people find to be more tangible and more relevant and a little bit more institutional or mainstream,
Mhm.
then and then he says something like, "Let's go to space." That garners a lot of attention, and it's a very gutsy thing to do because that could also, and people have ruined their lives and ruined their reputations, and
Oh,
people
absolutely,
don't take him
many
seriously.
times.
Yeah.
You know, prior to Rutan succeeding, it was the thing people would say, "If you wanna make a small fortune, start with a big one and get into a space company." Nobody was making money, and I'm telling you, it was a game changer moment, and it was a big deal. We did it 2 times within 2 weeks, by the way. We had probably 20 or 30,000 or more out there in Mojave watching. And my friend Glenn, he was a patriot from the Army, and he had a big American flag, and he carried that out there and handed that to Mike Melville when he landed, and they had that flag out there on
Oh,
top of
man.
that ship standing on it, and that was all Glenn, man. That's the friend that died in an accident in 2007
Oh,
after
man.
after I left. It was a nitrous accident. But the point is, your individuals can make a huge difference. And Glenn was very patriotic, and that was the American dream with the guy who flew it holding that flag. And it said government zero. And I mean, that's brutal, but it's still. And what really made Elon successful? Was it just a rocket? No.
Of
How
course
long do you
not.
think it would take him to be the richest man on the planet had he not decided he needs to sell data? And it's really about satellites, it's about networks. That's what he knew. He was his customer, period. And if
Right.
he had waited on other people's rides and organically grew it, there would be a lot more competitors in those lanes around him. Do you agree with
Mhm.
that? So he really knew that he needed to be his own customer and
Right.
fly his own payloads, and that was smart, very smart.
Well, I think that a lot of people, especially people that are comfortable bouncing around from business to business, often find ways to have businesses support themselves. It's a game. It's a literally a game as old as, you know
Yeah.
even ancient businesses. You get you. I mean, it
Coal
goes
miners, hey, coal miners in the coal miners store, and you have your
right.
own currency, and
I
you
was thinking, yeah, that the assisted living homes where they also own where they also own the companies that they do the laundry for the assisted
mm,
living. They also own the companies that sell the what do you call it? The PPE, the
yep,
protective equipment,
yep,
and then they also might own the insurance company that insures them, and then
yep,
all of a
yep,
sudden, you have 4 or 5 different businesses that they're all washing one another's hands, and everything is supporting itself. And, obviously there's, I would say, obviously some potential conflicts of interest and issues that could come up, but people get a lot done like that. People really
yeah.
build enormous empires that just kinda support themselves and feed themselves, and it's incredible to see.
You're right, you're right. When I went and visited Elon's company, me and some friends, and, it was the Falcon 1. That was a 6-foot diameter rocket, and he says, "This is the last one." He said, "If we don't make it, I am out of business. I'm out of money." So he
Mhm,
was down to 1 launch
mhm.
that made or break him. And my friend in Huntsville works for the Army. He did the small CubeSat, and Elon flew it. I think it was the 2nd mission. He said it hit the beach, kind of fell over, and that Elon, you know how he is, he's kind of a little bit on the spectrum. He brought that little satellite in to John, my friend, who was running the program. He said, "Oh, here's your satellite." It's like no sensitivity. And because I had lunch with him recently, he's like, "Well, here's your satellite. At least we got that back." And But Elon, when I was trying to sell my company in 2009, Orion, after I came back from this, my company took off. We were a propulsion company, Huntsville, and we were all over the news. If I took you around, you'd see articles all over that wall. Our company was great. We did some great things.
What was the
Elon,
name of the company?
Orion Propulsion.
Orion
I
Propulsion.
sold
If
it.
anyone wants to look that up, just for
Yeah, but I sold it to Dynetics. They were a homegrown defense company in Huntsville, pretty big. They're now owned by,
Palantir.
and that's it. Yeah, light us. But, the thing is, man, the I was ready to get out for a few reasons. We were about 50 people, and I was getting far away from the hardware, and now I'm up there kissing babies and up in DC trying to save, these big programs with Boeing, and I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, we're still testing rockets, and I don't even know what they're doing down there. Somebody's probably gonna get hurt," and I, because 'cause I've been around, you gotta remember, was the '70s when I lost Glenn. Glenn and I had a
Mm,
company. We're rolling and we're testing nitrous. And Rutan calls me and said, "Hey, we've had an Apollo fire. We've lost Glenn, and some others have been injured. And I'm on my way back up to the scale." But the point is, everything's real, man, when you're doing stuff and people are being killed. I mean, it's like, I can't have that going on. It keep you up at night, man. It
yeah,
really, if you're not in the trenches with your team because you're too busy doing IS 9100, trying to win the next contract, all that stuff. It's
yeah.
tough. And I talked to Elon's people about buying us, by the way. And
Oh, yeah?
at the time it was Gwen Shotwell, who's now still running it. She's the president. She's running it. She was there then. She said, "We would be interested, especially with politics in Alabama." And I said, "Because we can make hardware. We're doing it for Boeing." He said,
Yeah, I was gonna ask how come that Elon that never ended up in Huntsville?
She said Elon was in an ugly divorce, and it really was not the best time to bring this into the mix. I ended up
Always a
selling my
potential problem
company.
dealing with him.
Uh, well, at the launch, at one of his successful launches, I was out at Colorado Springs, and I'm behind him outside, and he had his capsule there. Yeah, that's right, our booster. And I said, "Hey, Elon," I said, "Great launch." He turned around, he looked at me, and he's like, he didn't
Yeah.
really say anything. He kinda just blew through his mouth and, like, didn't know, it's like, whatever, he was definitely, I normally, it would've been like, "That guy's a jerk," but I knew that's just comes with the territory.
Yeah, yeah.
Asperger's.
Did you read the by the did you read, briefly the biography that, what's his name wrote about him? The same guy that did, Einstein and Walter Isaacson. Sorry, the Isaacson biography on Elon Musk.
I have his book over there.
I liked, I li
It's one of his first books that was out. More like, it looks like a Tony Stark kinda book.
oh, I know you're talking about the previous Elon book.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I've worked with, some of his principals on some projects, by the way, the first 10 people. But a lot of us all were in amateur rocket magazines back in the day. We were out in Mojave just flying rockets for a week, and a lot of his
Mhm.
engineers were literally Aerojet people trying to do something fun on a weekend. And they
Right.
were really doing some cool stuff. And in fact, I got a bunch of the magazines right over there. My steam rocket was featured in there, two pager.
That's cool.
And the article was called Hot and Steamy. And it was all about the steam rocket. And the artwork they pointed it sideways and put wheels on it like it was a train. It was a cool article, but it's so different. When I came off this program to come to Huntsville, they had me front page, top of the Huntsville Engineering put this thing in space. It's like, man, now people are starting to pay a little more attention. This is commercial, and this is in Huntsville, NASA town. It's like, I want to
Was that
really
considered a
shout,
threat?
shout loud, but NASA was feeding me. They're good partner, and so it was this bittersweet kind of deal. But the papers did a great job representing me and what I had done.
That's really nice. I wanted to touch on something you said earlier,
Mhm.
which was that you felt, that there are times where things kept you up at night, where there were real stakes in things that in the work that you're doing. And there's a couple ways I think that people perceive breakthroughs, especially in science and technology, and that's consequentialism, which, as Carmelo Anthony puts it, from the NBA, there's no such thing as a bad shot that goes in. As in, as long as you get the results you're looking for, everything along the way it justifies it. And I disagree personally. My personal approach is you can never really know what the outcome was or how you got there. The only thing that you could really control is the morality of your behavior along the way. And I think that those opposing philosophies are two philosophies that are really at the root of a lot of the conflict that's been going on, particularly in this part, in this your part of the world, in propulsion and in space science and because there's no question that military touches on this too, and there's no question that weapons touch on this. Like you mentioned, Orion Sota Weapons Company.
Right.
So my question is, how do you navigate that? How do you feel about that? What's your perception on morals when it and ethics when it comes to the type of science that you're involved in?
You know, we like I work for a company in Maine and we have an air breathing technology that's like a just think a jet engine, but no moving parts for a upper stage. The guy who's running the company who started it, he's always wanted to put small CubeSats into orbit cheaply, small,
Mhm.
bread sized basket. And that is his dream eventually.
But for what purpose? What would that
Well,
accomplish?
because for a lot of times when we have things going on in the world, you don't need a satellite in Leo. You just need
Mm,
it for a little while to see what's going on in the perimeter or in an area. Could be for monsoon monitoring, could be for anything, a lot of things. Could be for the military that are in a little local theater doing stuff, but they have to call the Air Force to get data. They have to go through the
mm,
different agencies, and by the time they get everything back, there's the let's just say the components or the pieces have been moved on the chessboard. So,
sure.
the Army guy I was telling you about, the CubeSat guy who flew on Elon's rocket, it was him who came to me and said, "Hey, we need a small rocket to launch within a 30-minute call up to put something in a low Earth orbit, and I need us
Mhm.
to do it for under $1,000,000." And he said, "Tim, can you do that?" I said, "I'll think about it," and I did. And there's another nitrous liquid rocket I did for the Army. But now my friend's wanting to fly those size satellites, and it's a really neat technology. So I'm working hypersonics, and there's a lot of applications. One of them is kind of neat is you don't have to when you're flying Mach 5 and you hit something, you don't need an explosive.
Right.
You don't have a bunch of stuff in your bunker that goes boom because the air is in the sky and you're most of what you need, you're just burning a little fuel to go fast.
Mhm.
It's some cool physics and I'm enjoying it. But back to there's a lot of application for rockets. Look at all the commercial stuff I did. We got stuff hanging in the Smithsonian. Now you got Branson, who they built Spaceship Two, same company, and they brought me in for some problems. And in fact, Branson gives me a shout out in his book, and I didn't know that, but I'm in there. Really gives me more credit than I wanted to be credited for, but nonetheless, I didn't
You'll
ask
take it
him.
now that you got it.
Well, it's like saying, "Well, it's education and all that to write home about," but he knew better than anyone where what went where and da da da. So it's like
Right.
a sharp two-edged sword or something, but it's okay. I don't care. It's more to me about you can judge me after I'm dead if I made a difference. And then between now and then, I'm on a journey. I'll do the best I can. And if I'm relevant, we'll let others, the historians, decide what that looks like. That's sort of what I live by. I don't try to hit a home run. I said we do even with my company, when someone would say, "Hey man, we really are the best." And I didn't want people to get too comfortable because accidents happen. I'd say, we're pretty good, but we need to always stay on top of our game. And I do. I think we're very competitive and got some coach.
Mhm.
But you really do need to balance that because I'm, here I am talking to Rutan, who used to dog NASA and everyone, saying now we're doing this cheap. And then we've got people we're burying out here because we allowed them to go out there and stand next to a tank while we let nitrous come out. We weren't burning
Right.
anything, but it still blew up.
Right.
So we don't need people out there unnecessarily until we understand things. So those experiences I take back to my company. So you say what keeps you up is thinking I know nitrous oxide. I've been a subject matter expert on it for a wind tunnel for hypersonics over a few years ago. But to
Mhm.
have a call and something blows up and you don't even have a flame out there and what happened? And then you got Burt saying, "We're gonna share everything with you. Stay off your bikes and trucks, keep your daughter off her rocket bike." Whoever tells you to keep your daughter off a rocket bike, but he knew that we like to have fun, but it was a wake-up call, man. It's like, he says, "We're gonna share everything with you." And within a few days, I'm at a funeral with Glenn's mom, and he's there, and she's saying, "Hey, did they protect my son, Tim? Because I'm having to sign something saying I'm not gonna sue him." And I'm like, "I've been working in Huntsville for 3 years on my own company. I don't know, but I talked to Glenn weekly, and I think he was pretty smart, so I didn't even know the details." Well, then 10 days later, Northrop closes on a purchase of them.
Wow.
Exactly. So, I probably would have dug in a little deeper, but I didn't know. But she says, "Should I sign this? They're gonna pay for everything to come home." I think it was like $30,000. The next time she asked me to come over, "I want you to look through Glenn's stuff." There's this rocket go-kart, and I didn't want to take
Yeah,
his stuff, man. It was not.
yeah,
But the point is that this is your family, man. So you say, "Does it keep me up at night?" Well, when you learn something that maybe you're not as smart as you think, you were lucky that you made it through a few rocket flights on your bike.
yeah,
And you realize, boys, we need that data from Northrop now, and I'm thinking Northrop is never gonna share that with me because there's too much liability.
yeah.
Even though Rutan says, "We're gonna share it all with you." I did get
Sure.
a letter that said, "Here's some rules," but they shared it with all the public. So the point is, big business, you know this, they're not gonna write a handbook to tell you how to go burn 20,000-pound rocket motors with nitrous at high pressure. The
Right.
people that make nitrous are not gonna do that. They're not gonna go say, "With your 6-inch pipe feeding your 80,000-pound thrust motor, Mr. Virgin, um, you don't you here are some things you gotta watch out for." The people that make it know rules for a specific rate of which it's made, but to use it at high flow rates, hundreds of pounds a second, there's not been a book written on this stuff. So,
Right.
unless you go do a lot of data and testing to failure, by the way. If you don't test stuff till failure, you don't know where the edges are. You might be
What
lucky.
is testing till fail uh, there's, one of my favorite Calvin and Hobbes comics. I don't know if you're
I know.
familiar.
Yes.
It was when they're crossing a bridge that says weight limit, say 15 tons. And Calvin goes, "Dad, how do they know the weight limit?" And his dad says, "They keep on driving heavier and heavier trucks across it until the bridge collapses, and then they weigh the last truck, and then they rebuild it and set the limit."
Yeah, with a sample size of 1, and then the next one that breaks, well, that's 2 data points. That's
Right.
straight
Right,
line.
right. So, what does testing to failure mean, from a scientific perspective?
Well, it means that you better understand, like, for instance, if you have water hammer, when you slam a valve, if you wanna know what the adiabatic heating is, the compressive heating, if you wanna know, for instance, if you take Teflon in one of these, I wanna show you something right here, which is relevant to this. Hold on. Look, this valve right here,
Yeah.
this valve is made by a company called Murata. They've been around since probably the '40s. They fly on Elon's rockets. 1/3 of all the valves are made by Murata on Elon's rockets. Do you see how this valve's kind of split open?
Yeah, sure.
This was a nitrous oxide accident.
No
This valve was
way.
rated for 3,000 PSI. The nitrous was at about 500 PSI. Do you see that? You see that
Wow.
burn marks? Okay. Well, this happened. I sent this to Rutan after I was back in Huntsville, and I sent it to Glenn. I said, "I don't know the root cause of this, but this is a lot of energy." And by the way, this was not liquid nitrous in here. It was gas. So it was low density, not a lot of mass. Well, as it turned out, this is Teflon wire right here, Teflon coated wire. And guess what? If this 24 volts gets on here, and it did on the ground, it will short it out and start heating it like a heating element on a blow dryer. Guess what
Wow.
happens when Teflon gets to about 600 degrees? It creates something called fluorine. Fluorine is the most brutal oxidizer on the planet. It'll eat anything. It'll auto ignite anything. If you breathe a little bit of it, it will give you a heart attack.
Really?
Yes, sir. But what I'm saying is that little fluorine in there and a little bit of a leak of nitrous, they
Yeah.
got together and they created a bomb in this little cover. There was a connector here. And
Wow.
this thing
So that's
blew
that's
apart because of something silly, but it's still this is what I'm saying. You better understand everything because nitrous is a monopropellant. That means it can make a lot of energy without any fuel.
right.
It's the heat of formation. The stuff it took to bond it together is a lot of energy. And you
I
get
actually
that back when you break the bonds. And you know
I
how
meant
you
to
break
ask
the
you.
bonds? Is that you do it with a catalyst. You can use a you could use a catalyst like acetone, a little bit of heat. You lower that activation energy, the more catalyst that's surrounding it. But it's a beast. So you have to treat it. You don't just say they use it at the dentist office all the time. It's got to be okay. Our kids, well, they've also lost people on operating tables, whether you know it or not, from a hiccup on a table where they're using nitrous.
Right.
Something set off the nitrous, and they had a little micro explosion that inflicted other damage. So you could go do your homework on that, and you'll think, "Whoa, I didn't know that." It's,
G
the point is, we're writing the book on ways to get to space cheaply, and one thing that Burt didn't like about everybody else's solution is they were going to have cryogenic super cold oxidizers. I mean, minus 300, minus 270 degrees F. These composites, they had never worked with anything that cold. So they didn't want, Burt loved the idea of room temperature liquid nitrous. So I hate to digress, but this is the kind of knowledge that keeps you up at night because I still work with this liquid a lot, nitrous.
right.
And
Right.
in 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 programs I was on, they were even violating all the MSDS and everything. They were wanting more energy into the working fluid. And when you get more energy in, you can break the bonds. So people would say, well, it'll probably be okay, won't it? And I say, we are beyond the bounds of my knowledge because I want to follow the rules unless we create a new data set. And we can create it at a small scale, but without doing a scientific statistical analysis for each experiment.
Not gonna happen
I'm
anymore.
not comfortable. So when people wanna make me a safety officer on something that's dangerous, I'm like, I am not gonna be the rubber stamp guy.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. It's a huge weight to bear,
Yes, sir.
and it's a massive responsibility.
Well, and people are like, "Well, you're just trying to impede progress." I said, "Don't tell that to the guy who straddles a tank of nitrous and rides it down the road at 60 miles an hour. Don't tell that to the guy who has a rocket truck with 3,000 pounds of thrust. Don't tell me that I don't wanna have progress."
Right.
See,
Right.
they don't hold water with me.
I'm totally with you, man. I think there's a fine line, and I think that anyone that says that is kinda just trying to make you feel bad about it and manipulate into doing something you don't feel like doing, and that's 101 as far as I'm concerned.
Pull up a picture of my friend Glenn, say, "Hey, here's a guy just watching a tank, little valve
Yeah.
open up and it blows up in 3 seconds, 3 seconds.
Yeah.
10,000 pounds of nitrous.
Yeah,
Horrible.
crazy, crazy. Oh my gosh, I can't imagine. Crazy. I wanted to ask you because you did some homework about this, and I would love to let you off the leash with this, is, a little bit of the history of this field, because I really wanted to talk about space a little bit too, and I think we'll get to space through this,
Mhm.
but I do want to make sure that we hit this because I am really interested in the history, and I'm curious what you dug up, and I'd love to learn a little bit more about that.
Okay. So, we talked about paths to our success as a nation. I can talk about the American history. So, you want to go back to maybe some of the against the odd situations that our space program, rocket program started and how we almost didn't get there. We were almost probably defeated because one crazy person was self-taught guy was actually got us away from rocket motors that were blowing up all of our
Really?
launch. Oh yeah, that was a guy named Jack Parsons. He was a self-taught chemist. He made special effects for Disney, not Di yeah, Disney down in the not Disney, but at the time it was Hollywood. down in the
Okay.
40s. So down in, you know, down in Hollywood, and, his name was Jack Parsons, and he was really one of the founders, original founders of the JPL, Jet Propulsion Research Lab, Pasadena. He was also part of the American Rocket Society, which was a amateur group lighting rocket motors down there in the Aurora Canyon out there right next to where JPL is today. Is a canyon where water would flood out through there. So you'll see pictures. This is way before. This is back when Robert Goddard was in that same era. You remember Robert Goddard was the American liquid rocket guy who got the first liquid rockets to high altitude. That was Americans. And when the Germans came about, you know, and they later ended up in Alabama eventually. Yes, sir.
Which year what year around what time period is this?
Okay, well, the Jack Parsons stuff was
Jack
happening back.
Parsons, early 19.
No, it was in 1930s and 40s,
Okay,
40s. This was getting into
gotcha.
World War II. You gotta remember, Robert Goddard was, you know, he goes back to the turn of the century, a little after, you know, doing liquid rockets, but he
Mhm.
was not a team player. So he only did stuff with Guggenheim grants and a few people, and he moved slow and was methodical. So he was not going to be the guy like Elon to take us into the big wave of space exploration. He was a tinkerer and a very smart man, Dr. Goddard. I've read all of his papers. I've got them in my library, but the point is, military started during World War II there, they needed some rocket motors to help airplanes take off because they had tanks on them, they had all sort of stuff. So they said, "Hey, you're a rocket guy. We need you to build solid rocket motors." And that was not his wheelhouse. His wheelhouse was gasoline engines with liquid oxygen. That's mostly what he flew. So the point is, he was relevant in history, by the way, because when we finally caught the Germans after World War II and they were doing V2s, they said, "Where did you learn to build rockets?" They said, "From your Dr. Goddard and his
No
papers."
way!
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The
What?
papers
So the
that
Germans got their science from
the
Americans?
liq the yes, "Where did you learn to build liquid rockets?" They said, "From your Dr. Goddard. We read his papers." True story.
Wow.
So, like a lot of history, people, are more respected by our peers elsewhere.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's a microbiologist. He's wrote 400 papers. The Russians just exalted him and gave him a PhD honorary. You know,
Wow.
he was
What did you
I had
do?
lunch with him yesterday, and that's another story. It's another guy you ought to have on here. He's 84. He's
Wow.
brilliant, but
I
he'll
would love to
tell
talk
you
to you.
origins of life and the papers and the he's done well, he's gonna be fascinating because he's done a lot of deep dives in Antarctica with former moonwalkers, and he there's been
Wow.
documentaries with Dr. Hoover, and,
That's his name, Doctor Hoover?
Richard Hoover, he's got a Wikipedia out there, and, we had a 4-hour lunch yesterday, and I had an enjoyable time, and he is going to tell you how he's got an experiment that Elon's gonna fly to prove what kind of life is on Mars, because there's certain kinds of proteins that we do not want to bring back to this planet. So
From Mars.
there's yes, sir. So he wants to when they go for that early flight, he's got some little probes. In fact, he wants him and I to go over to Turkey and present a paper on this in a few months. And I'm more of the build it. I am the prototype guy, and he's the genius who's worked with Dr. von Braun and all the Germans and beyond. Incredible guy.
Wow. Wow.
He's got some stories too about some UFO stuff that happened when he was in Capcom. That was
Really?
yes, sir, during Skylab. The X-ray telescope was his project. He was the principal engineer. So he trained Owen Garrett how to use those instruments. So he was down in Houston on console when they were doing some things, and there were some bogeys that he said, "We've got bogeys." And they said, "Come again." Now he's not talking to Hoover. He's talking to the other guys. Hoover was
Mhm.
doing the X-ray, but still, this was more about out the window. And let's just say there's a story there, and some of these pictures disappeared, but they did make it into a book that Hoover brought. And he said these were grabbed by somebody in the media quick
No
enough
way.
but no, he said after a few minutes, they said, he said, there's several bogeys, and that, you know, they're like and then they came back and said, NORAD's on it. Said, "We copy, NORAD's tracking," is what they said.
What does that mean?
NORAD is a North American, if anybody's trying to attack us, that's our nuclear, uh,
Oh, wow. Wow, wow,
eye in the
wow. So
sky.
our most advanced
Oh, yeah.
defensive system or
Yeah.
program.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
And
Wow, wow.
but
And by the way,
anyway,
we're gonna get mixed in
you
with
need to
UFO
I don't
stuff.
wanna go down that rabbit hole, but he is not a conspiracy guy, and he told me 2 or 3 stories that didn't add up that he's willing to share now, and he's got pictures. So,
Wow.
yeah, he's a good one. So
I would love to talk to him.
yeah, so back to the early days of rockets. Well, Dr. Goddard was making black powder rockets and they kept blowing up. You can't have these solid rockets lighting and then a lot of them blowing up. So there's these guys that did a lot of pyrotechnics down in Hollywood, and they
There
were
you
the
go.
guys that came together and said, "Well, yeah, we'll build those solid rocket motors." And so they were some really kind of interesting people. And they started doing that for the military. And they were the guys who started Aerojet. There were several people, but the company Aerojet was formed by a self-taught chemist who built special effects for Hollywood. He's the guy who got all into the occult and was
Right.
having had a
I saw
home.
that, his Wikipedia page. What's that
Yeah.
about?
Oh my gosh. Well,
Into speculatory areas.
he was a very creative guy, and he was a big empathizer with the communist movement, and he had been reading about this guy named Aleister Crowley over in England,
Mhm.
or maybe Scotland. Anyways, he really respected some of what he's doing, but he wanted to tap into the ether and the knowledge that was promised through the techniques that the occultist was using, this Aleister
Man.
Crowley. So he ended up coming up with the formula to replace black powder, and that formula was based on fertilizer, it was based on asphalt, it was based on mineral oil were the main ingredients. So you remember I talked about asphalt?
Yeah, sure. That's yeah.
I read a paper from the '50s from the Gaussett of the work he did, and it had the formula, and that's when I saw that, I said, "I think asphalt might be the fuel for me." It came from that guy,
Wow.
and that's why I asked my wife, I said, "What is the energy in a gram of this in terms of BTUs?" But the point is, I didn't really know all this history at that point, by the way. I'm just in an old book from the '50s called Jet Propulsion History. So here he is now, the Nike missiles that protected us during the Cuban Missile Crisis. A lot of those had this propellant in them. And sometime when it would get really hot, it would drip out of the nozzles, this asphalt.
And
So
that's a
this
that
is this is
you
back
don't
to the
want asphalt
dream.
dripping across from the sky, do you?
Yeah, well, I'm just saying it took a bandit, a radical, a self-taught guy to come up with what solved that problem and got us reliable rocket motors. The problem with the black powder is it would crack. The grains would crack. You couldn't pack them tight enough. But when you
Right.
turn it to asphalt, there's plasticizers and like I talked about. So they ended up getting us through probably 20 years of rocketry because of that guy who ended up getting fired eventually and ended up going back in the business, and he ended up blowing himself up accidentally making fireworks. They shut him down, pulled his clearances, and then they said, "You can't be working. You've had too much
Oh,
collaboration with
man.
Satanists over the top Satanists in the country." It's the same guy that Osborne, Ozzy sung about in one of his songs.
No
He
way.
had a song called Mr. Crowley, talked about his black magic and how
Wow.
you went down a bad path. He's basically saying, you're no good. But you have to listen to it. It's kind of an eerie song, but it was a popular one. But so what happened is he had a big house and he got L. Ron Hubbard moved in with him. It was renting a place next to him in his house.
California.
Yeah, yeah. L.
Gotcha.
Ron
And
Hubbard.
L. Ron Hubbard is the founder of sociology. He's the
Yes,
creator.
Scientology. Yes, sir.
Scientology, I'm so sorry, Scientology, yeah.
Yeah, and the thing about it is the first wife of, Jack Parsons ended up kinda cheating on him with that guy, uh, and then Jack Parsons ended up marrying her sister, her younger sister.
What?
She moved in with him when she was 15 with both him and his ex-wife.
No.
She had now was hanging out with Hubbard, and when she was 15, at 17, they got married. This Jack
Oof.
Parsons married this girl, her sister. She was brought her dad abused her. It's all out there on the internet. This is there's a lot of
Man.
and she and her people were also practicers of the black magic, her family. So it was kind of what drew her, I think, to him somehow. They used to have a lot of meetings there in Pasadena. There was a place where these communists and occultists would meet occasionally and do whatever they do. It's out
Do
there. I
whatever
mean,
they
I can
do.
send it to you later, but I've done a lot of,
There's a
do
lot
you
of
think this occulting stuff, it comes out. We know people seek special gifts to be artists, to be great as a musician. They'll publicly sometimes even allude to it, you know, and so they'll do
Jim Morrison.
anything for some power and knowledge to be good at something. So on one side, they seek the dark forces. Over here, you've got people that are getting dreams at night, and they're like
Yeah.
Tesla. Tesla had these dreams and visions, and that's where he came up with the AC. That's where he came up with a lot of his ideas. So there was definitely, there's a book he was reading in one of his famous pictures, and I had that book. In fact, I had earlier I'd tried to make a copy of what that's a little bit of the details, but my printer went somewhere. But the point is, about 3 chapters in that book, instead of it becoming the nature of light and telling us, the principles of what he thought were light was made of, they want you to start going in a deep state of where you let your mind be cleared and tap into the knowledge and the ether. And that's where Rock said, "Nah, I'm not gonna get into all that."
Yeah.
Mm. But the point is, so he was seeking this, and that was his favorite book. This famous book, this famous photo of him with fire with sparks all around him, sitting in a chair.
Mhm.
That book is, and you can look it up. Just say, famous book Tesla was reading, and when he was doing that famous shot. But it was had to do with the nature of light, but also had to do with a lot of free information to be great at something.
What
Now
does that mean in
think
other
about
words?
well, I'm saying you're seeking something. You're seeking
Right, right.
to receive a breakthrough for whatever it is you're focused on. You're looking for answers without really doing the hard work.
Yeah. So this actually kind of gets me to one of the points we were talking about earlier, which is play and science. And there's a dark side of it. There's a dark side of play. There's a dark side of ways that you can kind of break eggs or ways that you wander into. There's always a line, and that line is very distinct. And it doesn't mean that there's not knowledge on the other side of that line, but there's always a price that you pay, right? There's just like the
Yes,
price
sir.
that you paid to have this newfound understanding of the value of safety, for example, and the value of the rubber stamp is something you had to go through a personal tragedy to experience.
Yeah.
It feels like with a lot of this stuff, with UFOs, occult stuff, a lot of and even if a lot of this is backed by science, people have such a strong initial vehement reaction to this.
Right.
And I feel like some of it is founded because I think there's some of it that really is dark stuff that I think people or society as a whole have understanding this is not something we want to go near. And then there's the stuff that, hey, like this UFO thing could be really interesting. There's a lot of evidence, there's a lot of documentation, there's a lot of people that have nothing to gain and everything to lose by talking about it, except, for it's they seem to be wanting to search they're not trying to search for something dark, they're trying to understand reality, and this shatters their sense of reality. And so the question, so what inevitably ends up happening is someone will say, "Well, how does that happen?" And the answer is, "I don't know." But
And
the
the
next
answer is
question should be,
sometimes
"Let's
you need
figure it out."
LSD to help you get there. Sometimes you need something to not block your conscious.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to go down a path that if you kinda overdo it, you might end up with bigger problems in your life.
That's the fear too, right? That's the line
Right.
between play and danger right there. But,
Yeah,
I mean, you have guys like Epstein that have been very, very involved in occult and science, that are very involved in anti-gravity and genetics and all this kind of crazy stuff, and and the occult, and I can't imagine that they're completely divorced from one another and that they're just 2 different segments that he just happens to be interested in. I'm sure that there's some kind of relationship between the 2 that led one into the next.
It seems to be there is a common factor. You know, they wanna call it science, but it's like dark matter. It's a placeholder. It's not a
Right.
description of a structure of any matter that we've ever replicated. We've never created in a lab. You know, it's like matter and antimatter and, you know, opposite sides, same coin, is it? Maybe. The point is that people tinker with stuff, and the thing about tinkering with advanced science, you gotta remember, we barely have an image of even an electron, by the way. We we theorize. This is why they put physics in philosophy, by the way. If you ever wanna know why
Do they?
physics, yes, it is. If you go to college and you take physics, it's in the philosophy, department.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
That's
because
cool.
historically, it's been all about what you think's gonna happen and the science and the you apply. I mean, you're trying to stitch together, but it has to do everything with the formation of the universe all the way down to the particles that we interact with. It's all of it, but at the same time, you bring math in as you find more information and data, and you try
Mhm,
to stitch together theories. But it's really those 2 are in this philosophy department, the point is we play with a lot of things that we can't see. We do it all the time. I mean, you know, go in a hospital. A lot of devices operate, well, it's an MRI or whatever. They know the behavior of different particles and they know how to spin them and they know how to get certain effects and they know
mhm,
how to get, you know, just to visualize it really good and see it with detail enough to know, well, that's cancer, that's something else. And but a lot of it, if you, people nowadays can buy a lot of surplus stuff, for instance, parts from MRIs, high voltage power supplies, they can get those and they can take them home and they can do discharge. Hey, they can do discharge voltages that could be 2 and 3 million volts. They can make big Tesla coils. They can create a lot of ionizing radiation, by the way. Do they have a detector? Probably not, because the pulse is so short, you probably would never pick it up on cheap equipment. I'm talking about a little handheld dosimeter. That's probably not gonna do it. But I'm saying all this because there are physics that we don't just because you know a little bit and you got a little bit of money, you could really get yourself in trouble. I have a friend who died of brain cancer. He was a genius, very much about 300 patents. His name was Larry Fullerton, right here in town. And I didn't know he passed away, but I saw a bunch of cool books and some transformers, big capacitors, powerful capacitors on Facebook. And I said, who would have these? So I went and I knew the guy, and he said, "Well, the family, they passed away, and this is stuff he didn't want." So I ended up with a lot of his library, and they were particle physics, they were magnetic fields. It was a lot of obscure stuff, a lot of notes. He signed every book, and I have part of that here, most of it. And I have his stuff. I'm like, who would have a freaking capacitor, 4,000 volts or 30,000 volts that has 600 kilojoules of Larry had programmable magnet company, but Larry got brain cancer, and by the way, and some of Larry's stuff, I have a nice lab X-ray machine from a laboratory, and he had
mhm.
plates, like old photograph plates. So Larry was definitely in some of these books of his, they tell you how to do photography type with the high frequency particles, how to
And what's it
detect them with
right,
gamma, alpha, beta, all the stuff that you can't see. The point is, he was playing with all that.
right.
You can
And
look
what
him up.
what implications does that mean
What
for
it
someone
means
like
is
me?
Larry was a he's like, you know, some people that I've interacted with through Amy, you know, Eskridge, sorry, but you know, I came on her board and I got to meet a lot of people that she was doing projects with. Everybody thinks Amy's got to be the scientist. Amy is the business person who has a very good accolade for what people are doing in the businesses. And
She
she's
wasn't a
that
sci she was more
she
of a
yeah,
businesswoman than a scientist?
she had a advanced degrees, but she didn't get a PhD in physics like her daddy, her daddy was a genius, Richard, and I know him. I met him before I knew her through my dad, who's a physicist. He was doing, advanced plasma physics, and he saw papers of Mr. Etheridge, And he said, "Tim, you gotta meet this guy. He's not like other people. He's very applied. I don't waste your time much." I was running my business at the time, and my
Mhm.
dad was building me high voltage sparkers for Bob Bigelow for the space to light it. And he went and talked to Richard about measuring high voltage plasma without affecting the power out. How do you measure the power without, it's like, looking at a particle and not affecting the outcome. But he said, "Richard is a genius." He said, "Tim, you gotta meet him." So we went out there and he was working for Dr. Cole in the Advanced Propulsion Group. They were actually trying to get antimatter in a container, and it was very controversial.
What's antimatter?
There's matter, and then they think there's the anti-particles for, different kinds of matter, but it was a very controversial thing where they thought it could create some people thought you'd end up with a black hole and you could suck us up locally in a black hole. You could look it up about the work that Marshall was looking at, but there were a lot of people scared to death in the world about them doing that. They shut that down, but they were doing the Ning Li experiment with the magnets that she was the one who formulated that she could reduce gravity by spinning this super magnet, and she could reduce gravity by 3%. And they ended up building copies of that, Richard, Amy's dad, and a guy named Glenn Robertson, who's a good friend of mine. He's still doing magnets today. He's retired. These guys are still very busy doing research on their own.
Yeah. No, they never stop.
They're gonna die doing research. They haven't stopped, and they'll do it on their budgets, or sometimes people will come and fund them, and that's a real problem because people that are genius that work some very serious programs, a lot of those people usually get swept up by the MIC or military industrial complex, and they have a lot of fun with some careers playing with stuff they could only dream of. But these guys are NASA, so they're more commercial, but they're still doing some really on the edge stuff. And they can't but the thing is Amy was willing to take their brains and do some real way out physics and commercialize it and give it to the world. Now
What'd you do? What were you trying to accomplish?
that was that was an antenna system that he developed using some bismuth and some other materials that would have had some unusual effects of about, there were mass change effects with this device.
Mass change
Some
in
of the
what?
when I say yeah, just imagine you having a type of antenna that you could point to, let's say, the moon, and you're weighing this thing, by the way, it's battery powered, you're weighing it, and you're seeing mass changes when you
Mhm.
point it to different bodies.
Mass
I'm
changes
talking weight,
would be a
weight of
consequence
this
of a change in gravity around that mass?
there's a change happening local that it could be up to 3 and 4%.
And
Don't ask me the physics. I can just tell you it gets pretty heavy duty. It has to do with, materials, metamaterials. It has to do with spin of particles and
but I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand what the
yeah.
consequences of what it
Well,
means
no, I'm
to have
saying
3% less gravity. What does that mean? Does that mean you could
this is
jump
just
higher? Does that mean it's I could
well,
like,
it could mean a lot of things. Some people reduce gravity local with ion wind, okay? That's high
okay.
voltage, plasma, and it's accelerating one direction, and it's air. It's moving air. It's plasma. It's turning the nitrogen into, to a hot gas, glowing, and they're moving it to from electrode to an anode or vice versa. But that is an example of people, quote, "It looks like mass is changing if you're measuring thrust." So what I'm just saying is there were a lot of interesting claims that her dad spent a lot of time on in this area.
Mhm.
He didn't do it to fool himself, I can assure you. He's not like, "Hey, isn't this cool? Let me fake you." He's not, he's a scientist. He's not a man of words. He doesn't speak a lot. He's just very, very into it. And so is Tony. Tony's the same way. Now he'll be speaking at a UAP conference in Canada, Tony, about this
Tony
experiment
who?
that we Tony Robertson,
Tony Robertson, yes.
Glenn Robertson, Tony, he's presenting up at, Canada in a few months, it'll be a UAP conference. He's speaking about this project he and I have been working together. I'm more of a force multiplier when it comes to acquisition of various hardware to do testing.
Mhm.
manufacturing loan stuff, I find unique stuff, and I make sure he's got what he needs to do the work.
Very cool.
And I don't
It's
charge
awesome.
for it, it's just purely, I hope we can redo it's an experiment that Podlikov did. If you look that guy up, he was,
Who? Bob who?
I think it's Pod, Podlikov. Just look up gravity, or pulse gravity experiment with, Podlikov.
Okay. I'll take a look into that.
Yeah,
Give
and
me a
you'll
lot of
find
rabbit
there was
holes
a
to go
Wired
down.
article written by a guy named Platt, who wrote for Wired and others. He wrote about it. He went and visited the guy. The problem is Glenn has figured out some things that weren't probably shared properly, and he is very smart. He makes superconductor magnets at home, very large ones, and he knows what he's doing, and he's got several patents, but he is so committed to exploring these lanes. We're talking, pulse power, the ability to create a little gravity wave and maybe dent something or do something unique.
Whoa.
So we'll see, but when
Wait,
you're
but that so
working,
that could be used as a weapon?
I
That could be
don't,
used in the military?
if somebody could probably use that as a weapon, but that's not his interest. He's interested in propulsion to get off the planet and really make some breakthroughs. The problem here is these are all so closely tied together. Weapon, pulse something one way, something moves the opposite
Yep,
direction.
yep,
It's
yep,
all depending on how you use it.
yep, yep,
What's stationary and what's moving?
yep.
And
It's
you
very
start getting
interesting.
in the wrong lanes, and this is the problem, you're smart guys like that, people can nowadays do some amazing stuff with what they can find on eBay and networking, and they're doing some crazy physics at their homes, man, and I think in the government, they know that these folks are probably skating around some interesting stuff, and they're keeping an eye on it, I'm sure,
Yeah,
because, as you know, if you go after a patent, as you do medical devices and things. If you get in the wrong lane, they won't give you a patent on some stuff that's too close to.
yeah.
That's the law, man. They're not gonna let you get in those lanes. And I think, plus, I think they're crazy people who think you're hiding something, and they're out there too. Some of the people that have killed famous people, they weren't. They were wanting to be famous through taking out someone who looked like they were doing something amazing. There's just always reasons. People, Bigelow has seen all flavors of those people.
Hey, can you can you tell me who Robert Bigelow is, or Bob
Bob
Bigelow is,
Bigelow is
or
a
and
guy when he was a kid, his parents both had experience with a UFO in the desert, and it was very close, and and they talked about it, and Bob, I think, later saw something too, and he said, "Someday I'm gonna be rich enough to go out to the stars, and I'm gonna figure out how to do it." And he couldn't make his money. He had to get in the business of budget suites, a hotel to make enough money to
that's right.
do space, so he became a billionaire, and I met Bob at some conferences, space conferences.
What was he
Then
like?
Bob Bigelow is
What is he
a
like, rather? He's
he
alive,
is.
right?
He's an impatient man. If you watch him, if you listen to why he got out of sold Skinwalker, if you ever watch that, you
Uh-huh.
should, because 'cause he'd say, "We had, the best equipment, observing phenomena, and it just kept changing." He says, "I'm not a patient man." He said, "Nothing made sense." He said, "We try this, we try to reproduce the same
I don't
experiment."
buy that, by the way. I don't buy that he's not a patient man. He spent his entire life with one goal, one singular goal.
Yeah, but he really believed you wrap enough science equipment and the right team around it, you're gonna get to the bottom of it, and you're gonna see how you can exploit this for your own use. Maybe
Right.
there's something here. That's what you do. You look for outliers in physics and say, "I'm gonna go study that because it doesn't add up. I don't know the answer, but we're gonna do a bunch of testing and try to reproduce it." Like lightning bolts with rocks moving and, all that stuff where they prove some of that stuff, why that happens, but these are the outliers. Well, Bob wanted to know. And right now, what's Skinwalker? They're out there poking the bear. They don't really know what they're poking. They're getting results. They're getting stuff
There's some
from. You
I
got
just heard
some
the
cattle.
podcast.
Got cattle at wrestling. You got they're cut up with a laser, and they're, it's just bananas, man, and they're calling themselves scientists. I know Travis Taylor, he is a scientist. I was on the Rocket Sea Redneck TV show with him, by the way, for
Is
the
he the
rock.
gentleman that bought the
No, that's Brandon Frugel.
Oh, yes, I just heard him
He's
on,
a
on
real
Sean
real
Ryan.
estate real estate guy.
I just heard 4
But
hours of him.
Travis Taylor has 3 PhDs. He's from Huntsville. He worked for the Army, SMDC, held a lot of clearances. He's a, bright man, but I'm telling you, they are getting their minds blown out there. The other day, Travis said, "I think I know why we're all having horrible nightmares since we started doing the ranch." He said, "I used to never have dreams." He said, "They're the worst nightmares. We always have them at the ranch." He's saying this on podcast or something. He said, "Well, there's a lot of X-ray, not X-ray, there's a lot of microwave, high power microwave energy in that down in that area for whatever reason. We don't know where it's coming from." He said, "But it messes with you." So they're in a soup of a lot of broad spectrum radiation, and it's bananas. You know, he got hit by with gamma ray while he was down there, came out of a well, went through his leg, went through his hand, to his head. He got cancer. It showed me at a UAP conference.
Oh.
And he said, "They I had to get this cut off." And I said, "What do you think's going on?" And what he said, "I don't know, but my dosimeter went off I was wearing. It showed gamma." And he said, "I started slamming beers to get my system flushed." He said he was peeing black the next day. He went to the
Whoa.
hospital, and it was real. You know, people think all this stuff is purely staged. It is scripted TV to a degree. There is a flow that somebody's managing, and they're stitching it together, but I'm not saying it's lies. It's let's launch a rocket and see what happens. Okay, you're watching it bounce off something,
Yeah.
that stuff. So
So
so Bob eventually, and by the way, I spoke to, I'm not gonna call his name, but a guy who did IT with Bob for many years at home and elsewhere, probably too much. But he was a good guy. We talk, and he said, "What can you tell me about the ranch, man?" You gotta remember, I'm a contractor building rocket motors for Bigelow for his space station. Okay,
right.
Orion, and I'm the chief engineer. He said, "You step down as president, you're gonna do this, or I'm not giving you the $4.8 million contract." I said, "Absolutely gonna do it." So I got to talk to his guards. A lot of them were special forces out of the military. I mean, his guards
Mhm.
everywhere out there, by the way,
Right.
barbed wire
Yeah.
fence. And they would tell me, I said, "You been out to the ranch?" They said, "Yeah, I spent 2 months. I hate it out there." Well, well, it's a lot of boring, but a lot of crazy. What is crazy? He said, "Well, we might go to the grocery store. We got groceries everywhere. And we come in, we set them down, walk in the next room, they're all over the floor. Cabinets are open, just stuff like that." So Bob said it's poltergeist stuff. You remember him talking about that? He said,
I heard him
followed
talk
my
about that, yeah.
wife home, followed me home. And by the way, there was a guy Amy brought to me to Huntsville. I met. Well, he was a PK. He's a psychokinesis guy. And he spent time up at the Monroe Institute.
No way.
Yes, sir. He sure did. And he had skills. And I'm like, okay. Well, she was
You
part of
experienced
another,
him?
she was with another couple of people that I won't mention the name because in her text she told me one of them was compromised by, she was told that by
Okay.
someone in the military she was working with. But the point is, he had pictures and he had video on his camera looking at a screen like you are, a screen, and it was a UFO going over some trees. There was a door, it looked like a freaking this flying over. I said, "What is this?" He said, "This is phenomena." I said, "Where is this?" He said, "This was from the camera of some of the video cameras at Skinwalker."
Yeah.
Where did you get these?" He said, "They paid me to come out and use my skills." This is when Bob owned it,
Yeah.
to use my skills for a couple, 3 weeks to see what he could discern from this chaos. So now we're in poltergeist world, okay?
I'm trying to be with you.
I'm saying we're throwing all the
I
everything
know,
at
but
it.
what could it be? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense because again, you're talking about sober-minded people. You're talking about people, and I mean, you hear the guy, especially the gentleman that since bought it from Bigelow. That
Right.
guy seems to be an extremely sober-minded guy,
Yeah,
gentleman.
absolutely.
No, I mean, and he's like, there are things that are going on that I just don't know, and like, and that is someone that I believe way more than someone that is definitively yes or no, like, "I'll tell you what this is," or, "I'll tell you that doesn't exist because we
Yep.
can't explain it." Like, he's like, "I don't know." It's freaking me out. We're trying to figure it out. We've devoted millions of dollars to figuring it out, and it just we can't. We have no idea.
Exactly.
And so I we're poltergeists over here, right?
That was Bigelow taught that's his language, not mine.
Right.
You know, he said that. Now, coming from
Yeah.
him, that's incredibly unusual because he's all about the science.
Right.
Okay, he owned it before Brandon, and he said it really affected his wife. You remember? He said that the way it would interact with her. So it really did sound like the movie, like a poltergeist deal, you know? It's just so and there was the hitchhiker effect, and now you're thinking, "What is that?" Follows you home. Travis Taylor told me that a couple years ago at a conference. He said, "If you're not this stuff will go home with you," and I said, "What are you talking about? This phenomena?" I said, "What?" And I'm thinking, you are 3 PhDs, and we're talking about a phenomena that's going
Yeah.
on with you, and it's gonna mess with you. It's cut his car off out there, a brand new car, when he was out there getting his mail
What?
on the way out. That's what he told me, and it cranked back up, and it happened a couple times, and he said, "That's the kind of stuff that happens." He said, "We
Oh
all
my
have it happen."
god.
He said, "Anyone who goes out there, these things affect you when you leave." He said,
I wanna ask, I've been wanting to ask this for a while because it keeps on coming up.
"Mm,
These phenomenon generally seem to happen around military bases or large experimental bases. In general, right? Like, you wanna go to UFO you want if anyone wants to see a UFO really badly, they know where to go. You go to Nevada, you go to Huntsville, you go to F you go to certain parts of Florida. There are parts in the country that people that you can reliably go on a, I'm sure, a fairly regular basis and come across something that, probably at this point, is probably man-made, right? I imagine.
I think a
But
lot of it."
yeah, and so what do you think the story is? Do you think this is all weapons? Do you think there was inspiration for weapons and we've been replicating it? That's why, like, do the base come because of the stuff that's there to begin with, or do the things visit the bases because it shows a spike of consciousness and intelligence in humanity that is just unprecedented? What do you think is going on over there?
Well, if you and I, let's just say you and I are pure scientists and we're down in the rabbit holes. By the way, we're not religious people. We like the facts. We don't want anything but science. We want something to be explained to us as science, period. And so we're open to anything to keep our country at the forefront. We're open to anything, any phenomena that looks wild and crazy, orbs.
Mhm.
What are they? Are they man made? Are they coming from a lightning storm? How do they sustain themselves? How do they, you know, right now, if you said go in a lab and make me an orb and send it out the front door, I don't think anybody could do it, by the way, that we know of. Now, I'm saying I'm saying it's not something the Tesla people and all of them, nobody's doing that at home. They can make little orbs set in a magnetic field, spin around and all that. But to have them go across the field and kind of keep themselves lit off and go through a wall, even Brian Benny, the pilot of Spaceship One, in one of our flights to Seattle, not Seattle, it was down to South Nevada. He said he flew F-15s, man. This guy was on a carrier landing guy. He's one of the pilots. He said he had an orb come through the cockpit, come in one side, out the other. Didn't seem to affect anything, but nobody's going to talk about it. You'd be grounded. You would be grounded. You wouldn't be flying that machine if you're going to be psychologically evaluated. Everybody knew it.
In the
Came
cockpit?
through the cockpit. He said didn't like burn anything.
Was it a
He
physical
said it was
presence,
a
or
ball,
was it
a little
energy?
ball of
What
light. He said a little ball of light came through.
Okay, so we started talking about this before. Ball of light, it could be is magnetic,
Yeah, that's right.
and it doesn't have to a ball of light doesn't have to be physical, like, mass. It
Well,
doesn't have to be something.
it's, as you know, not all plasma. You've held your hand on a little plasma ball at a store and you don't feel any heat from that. I mean,
Right.
there are, so I'm not saying it had tons of energy associated with it, like it's, putting UV light and burning his face, but he said it didn't seem to affect anything. So I can't tell you how what frequency or how much power there was, but he didn't see any damage caused by it. But he told me and Rutan that story. And now this is a guy that was going to be flying our spaceship, and he wouldn't be telling us stuff that would probably ground him with us. In other words, if we thought he was crazy, we wouldn't have. He wouldn't have. In other words, he was. I think he was telling the truth. I mean,
Right. Meaning he didn't have
re-
anything to gain from telling it to you.
no, no, it really should have not told us anything because
Right.
he'd only been working for Burt for probably about a year and a half. Then, but what I'm getting at is I think I think we I think for a long time, I personally think that we've dabbled in a lot of stuff in order to try to understand it. And I believe we've had our look at what happened when the Russians during the Cold War, they had a remote viewing program. So all of a sudden America had one, quietly had a remote viewing program.
Tied in with the Church of Scientology.
Even better. Well, and then of course, well that's a good one. That's a good one because it's it was the traditional churches that weren't fond of you doing these remote viewing psychic stuff in the name of any for any reason. Why are we paying for that? So then it kind of went quiet and then it became the Monroe Institution. That's where Hal Puthoff spent some time, good bit of his time. And now there was other great spoon benders and all sort of people. I knew a guy who went through that. His grandmother died. He's having dreams, and he got tested, and they went up there for 2 or 3 weeks. He was a massage therapist. He worked on me sometime, but he was telling me, "You work for Bigelow," and then he starts sharing his experience up at the Monroe Institute, who he trained under. And he said, "I said, why would you be up there?" And this guy called himself a Christian healer. And I said, "Okay, tell me about this." I'm on the table getting massages. He was good at deep tissue, hip stuff, sciatica in particular. But I'll tell you what, I looked him up the other day. I'm not going to say his name, but he was working on me pre-COVID or during COVID, probably a little bit. He looked him up in the paper, and he got went to jail for crack and stuff. He looked awful.
Shit.
Yeah, so he in order to he was showing me a little skill he thought he had or something, and I'm like, "Okay, what do I do with that?" And it had to do
Yeah.
with the necklace and spinning it one way and then other, and, he was just thought he was people tell you stuff if they know you work for Bob Bigelow and you're in advanced propulsion or whatever, people just start sharing stuff with you.
Yeah.
Believe
I
me,
bet.
they
I bet.
do. They think you're one of them. And I'm one of them is sometimes it's satanic people that they're all in. They've
Yeah.
got the garb and they're thinking, "Oh, I'm at the right table." I mean, I had 2 of them tell me that this is gonna be fun because they think, I've got some great stories I'm gonna tell. I've seen different sides of this, man, and it's like, I personally believe in the name of national security and keeping us number 1, I think we've explored things we probably don't know what we're doing in many cases.
That's like the consequentialism that we talked
Yeah,
about
that's
earlier.
right.
If we don't do it, someone else will.
That's like the AI. That's like the CRISPR technology. If we don't, they're gonna run around us. So consequently, we gotta get in the front of it. It's kinda
And it's
crazy.
crazy, I don't even know if that line of thinking is even necessarily is even necessarily true or rational. I think that we have our perception of reality, and especially of other humans in other countries in general, is so much of it is so manufactured, and so much of it is so much of our perception, I think, is so one-sided and so intentionally blind, and not from the people that are seeing it, but the way that it's being taught, and the way that our perceptions are forged and shaped. I think that people do like, if the wor I think that there could be I don't know how it would even happen, but because I think the people running the show aren't those type of people, but I think there could be a world without nuclear weapons, but using nuclear power. There could be a world in
Right,
using science again, like you said earlier, science is a tool the same way
right,
amoral. There's no good or bad.
right.
It's just the way that we choose to implement it or not, and we are at everyone's throats all the time. We're so tribal, and I think one of the big threats of space, one of the big threats of space travel is that we ultimately begin to start looking at one another as one tribe instead of looking at the American tribe and the Russian tribe, or the American tribe and the Chinese tribe. And the planet Earth is a tribe, and that would be catastrophic to the general order of the way that the world is running right now.
But you know what? Since the beginning of time, there people can't seem to be content with, being, on this level. Somebody's gotta be the top dog, always, and we can't you don't trust people, and, I mean,
Yeah,
it's as old as time, man. I
but
mean, it
that's why we need religion.
yeah.
I personally believe that that's why we have religion in general. I think religion for humanity is an evolution of consciousness. Hey, who would have ever thought that man would be monogamous? I mean, like, look at I mean, think about how old we are and how old our species is, and for a guy to say, "I'm gonna put on a ring and then, never touch another woman for 60 years," which goes against who knows how many primal or evolutionary instincts that guy might have.
Yeah.
I mean, we depe or the fact that we have manners. I mean, like, all this stuff is we these are evolutions of consciousness that make us something different, and so that's just another step on the ladder that we gotta get to, but I don't know if it's that far off.
Well, I think it seems to be, it's not a bad guideline for living a lot of what we learn in our in various scriptures. And it's practically when you get old, you look back and say, more power and more latitude and more freedom is not necessarily going to be a good thing for the kids. And the structure of good enough as and finding that happy medium and balance in your life, all those things are I mean, there's not too many good stories where people conquer everything and they're number 1
Mhm.
and they get to stay there. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And
Or
of course, they've tried the United Nation thing, and then but the problem is, inevitably, there's people that's thinking there's too many of us, and they're gonna figure out how to thin us out, and everybody who makes money seems to be fine with using various whether it's through health, what we eat, what we do, how we live, it's okay, feed us crap, and, there'll be a lot of people that don't have money that will be happy to buy the crap,
Mhm.
and they'll die earlier, and I'm telling you, there's people that really do look at us as that we're not that important. Maybe the
Yeah.
animals are more important or more intelligent because they're not
Yeah.
doing as much destruction as us. So inevitably, the problem with the nuclear weapons is, yeah, you need a world police kinda because we really are to that tipping point, by the way. We are at the tipping point where everyone says, well, they only have 60% concentrated, you know, material to make bombs with. The thing is that people don't understand is it takes a long time to get to 50% with the process, but you can get a bomb in a matter of weeks with that percent and get it to where it needs to be. It's not linear. It takes a long time to get to that that amount of, purity, by the way.
Mhm.
Then it's
That's
easy.
interesting.
It's very easy to get the rest of the way, and that's a problem. It wouldn't be a
Well
problem if you didn't get rewarded so well if you blow some people up, 'cause the program if you're a male for some people, they
Mhm.
get some pretty good hookup for doing bad things to other people. So, I don't know the answer, but I'll tell you one thing, without trust and, verification methods, we're in a pickle, and this goes back to what Werner von Braun was talking about, this moment in time where we're going to have to deal with the alien threat, and he says, "But it's not gonna be aliens, it's gonna be the governments trying to manage big this big thing called Earth and the nuclear weapons here and there, and now we need a common belief
did
system,
you
we
hear
need a common enemy, we
Yeah.
need to get rid of these weapons or throw them at the aliens," but he said it's gonna be us. It's a way they're gonna try to manage the acceleration of knowledge, technology, and they need a way to grab a hold of the whole planet
I
and
think
manage
Stephen
it.
Greer was saying that the other day, wasn't he? Did you see that? Stephen Greer?
I don't know that I heard him the other day saying I know that
He
he
said the
has
other
mentioned
day
Von Braun before in this scenario, but
he mentioned that there was 2 different attempts for projects and, for mass, I guess, control or, like a COVID type event.
right.
And that a faked alien invasion is being planned for 2028 or something like that, which is why we're starting to head down this path now. But again, what makes this so frustrating is that like every good conspiracy theory and like every good government event and like every good issue that ever happened, there's always a little bit of truth probably laced into that. And so if we were to say that, you know what, the universe is almost certainly teeming with life, I believe it, and the universe is and I don't know whether people have whether life has visited Earth. I'm inclined to say yes, personally, but that's just because I want to, I think, more than
Yeah.
anything. But sure that so I'm sure that there's grains of truth to if there is a planned alien invasion, there have to be grains of truth within that they're that, you know, not gonna whip this out of nowhere, and there has to be some kind of hard signs that you can point to. Listen, people did die of COVID, like, that wasn't a
Oh,
question.
yeah.
COVID was a tragedy for an enormous amount of people. There was no question that like, the question isn't tragedy or not, the question is manufactured or not, with what intent, to what extent, and so
Right.
on, but and by the way, the answer could be whatever, and, you
Yeah.
know, that I don't even care to get into that,
I
but
think it's all the above.
right,
A
right.
little bit of all the
And so
above.
that I think that this is too I think that this is what it's gonna be too, and I've also heard that disclosure could be just a slow rolled process. That it's not one bombshell, but it's a series of conversations that become normalized over time, and movies in Hollywood that start to get endorsed by the public, and then all of a sudden Obama's saying something and Trump's saying something, and all of a sudden you have people on both sides of the aisle and the age of disclosure and this missing scientists, and
Yeah.
then now everyone's kind of already there. Everyone's already there without anyone having to come out and say anything.
Yeah, we're getting warmed up for sure. I kinda listening to Tim Burchett and listening to Luna and they're pretty junior to have this project that they have in their court
Sure.
to be chasing the old school, the old guard. Do you agree? They're young. That means they could be pretty gullible about
Luna in particular, I thought was strange how involved she is. Like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
cool, but I'm surprised.
Yeah. So, and they said today, I think I heard Tim Burchett say today, he said, well, they said, do you really believe in aliens? And he said, I believe there is evil. And he said, you know what I'm deducing from this? I am thinking that there are people and forces in play where they're seeking knowledge for great technology and they're doing unconventional
I
things
think
like
Sam Altman's one of those guys too, by the way,
okay, I
for
think
the
they are
record.
literally they want the toys and they don't wanna have to work as hard, so they are praying for knowledge from whatever's out there that will give them some feedback, and I don't think the what's out there, the details of that, the public is ready to hear that story. That's what I think. I think they have figured out how to communicate with whatever is out there talking,
Yeah.
and I'm talking conscious. I'm talking they're getting it and they're calling it ether. They're calling it quantum. We may be getting a message from across the universe. It could be instantaneous coupling and you know what I'm saying? It could
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah,
duality and we just tuned into the right frequency. It takes people to do this. And I think that's the controversial part. The fact that we'd be paying anybody to be doing laying in a bed or in a chamber doing something
yeah,
we call collective conscious seeking some way to have destructive outcomes with the toys that we might the knowledge we gain we use them to for maybe for and let's face it, if it's free energy of some sort, I'll call it free over Unity, that will definitely be squashed for a lot of reasons.
Do
Energy
you
is
think
yeah,
yeah,
because energy is there's so much invested in the way we currently, run our whole system and who benefits. Absolutely. I don't see that we're gonna get the hookup on anything. Another problem is when you have a really dense way to get a lot of energy, you have a dense way to build some awesome weapons and launch them. And if you can
yeah,
pull it out of ether, you can do it from anywhere. So that's the problem. They all kinda it's like I think Eric would argue too that they all could be the same coin. The nuclear piece and the energy in other words, the making of energy. You remember he talked about the Bravo, the hydrogen bomb going off, and they were talking about the yield that came out of that far exceeded what they predicted. There was something
okay.
happening with that bomb, and the scientists looked at the data and think, "Holy cow, there's some other physics going on here, coupling with this bomb and giving us more yield than we ever predicted." He said, right then, they said, we're gonna do a moratorium on doing hydrogen bombs and nuclear weapons, and I think based on what I've read, they were able to scale down all experiments because if they're a lot easier to make than they were the fission. The fission took a lot of magic happening exactly the same time. The the hydrogen bombs, apparently they're much easier to light off. So that's what I believe. We're doing stuff at small scale because we go unnoticed. But
Right.
we know with enough of the same material, the same physics, we can build a big one. And I think that's why we don't hear a lot of people popping off stuff that gives you seismic activity, of 9 on the Richter scale here and there. It's rare.
I wanted to ask you, unless and you
Yeah.
mentioned this earlier, I don't know if you wanna talk about it again or not, but,
Yeah.
quick defense of the Amy Eskridge video that was going around, because I
Yeah.
think that I mean, I would personally like to give it a fair shot. It's up to you whether you wanna,
I
elaborate
would. I
on what
do.
I'm talking about.
Well,
We can
that
leave the
was
guy's name out of it that
okay.
published it if you want,
Well,
but
the
just
people
in her defense, because people I've seen already a couple of videos online and different podcasts and different, X accounts and stuff that are basically calling her a kook and saying that, she's probably brilliant, but who knows what her mental state was, who knows what her emotional state was, we don't know, with someone like that how and as someone that knew her and her dad and has worked with her and advised her, I just wanted to get some of your 2 cents on that.
Yeah. Who do you think is more dangerous? A scientist who's used to keeping his head down and working, and doing his job and following protocols and respecting the community and the science? Or do you think the daughter of a dad who does that, who's good at spilling the beans and telling the story, and I'm gonna share it with the world? Which one of those 2 people do you think is really more dangerous?
Mhm.
Collectively, there's a lot of danger there, but it's highly unusual to have that combo, okay? She wasn't stupid. She was definitely a threat to some people, no doubt about that, based on text I have and things that I know. And you gotta remember a lot of my interaction with her was in 18, 19, and then later a little bit with her dad, but she passed away in, what, 2022, right? I think it's 2022, last time I saw her was at the UAP conference in Huntsville, the first one they had.
Wow.
Her dad were there, and Hal Puthoff is really the first one they had at Huntsville, and, that's where Alonzo, finally came out and came to Huntsville,
Mhm.
and you know, he's an intel I'm connected with all these people on LinkedIn. Those that A lot of the people that do this stuff, they don't have LinkedIn profiles, man. They
I bet not.
they don't
I
need a
wouldn't have
they
one.
don't need a job.
Yeah.
They're having fun, and I can promise you they ain't gonna talk about it. There's no good so people that yap all the time generally are a lot of people quote doing research and yapping about it all the time. They're probably not that. They're just looking for hits and followers, and that's what I think. But Amy was different. She represented some incredible people, by the way, talented people that never talk. In fact, one of the scientists, I looked that guy up. I couldn't find nothing on this guy, and
Really?
he was a nuke guy, and he'd worked apparently. So this guy was working with a neutron generator that he had developed to do science at the hospitals. Okay,
Mhm.
there's certain types of radiation patients get. They use radiation to kill cancers, but the half-life of what's out there they have to bring in, it could be a day. It's only gonna last 24 hours, and then you gotta fly more in. Have you ever heard of that? There's
No.
certain particles that they use, and he was able to create some of these with a emitter that he designed and had glassblower make, and it was incredible, and he was pitching this as a product that he could sell, even though you wouldn't normally get to offer his when are you gonna get to offer a commercial product when all you've ever done is design them wacky weapons? What is gonna be your commercial product? So he's found a lane to get in, and which is cool. I was totally blown away. I said, "Who made all that intricate glass and all this?" He said, "One of the best glass blowers in the country, makes glass up near Chattanooga, up that way."
Yeah,
But
Tennessee.
this guy was, very soft spoken, and I'm just blown away. This is over my head, man. I'm down in his lab, and he was the real deal, man. And that's the kind of people Amy had on different projects. She'd find funding so they could go build a commercial product, but the potential of those people is what's scary. It's not the commercial products. By the way, that particular product could scan the ground and look for certain munitions, and it would kick off a certain emission. So he had a sensor that he had designed that could see things like explosives and stuff. So there were other uses to penetrate the ground and scan for IDs and all that kind of stuff, improvised munitions. So there was a lot of good that these people can do, but I'm telling you, she was not full of it. Amy was the real deal. She was in a job doing keeping real opportunity coming through the door and applying it and keeping her dad and others out of a lane maybe that would be get them in trouble, okay?
Yeah, yeah. Do you think that man,
And personally, I believe the potential of these geniuses, some of them, that's the scary part, and there was nobody with a horn like Amy, and she was gonna tell the world that we're working on this anti-gravity. Now, by the way, anti-gravity, yeah, who doesn't wanna fly to the moon or whatever? But the point is a lot of these were those small experiments that were demonstrators. They weren't like they had a flying saucer in the backyard that I know of. But the point
wow,
is
right.
the fundamentals, and the fact that she was gonna spread all this to the world, that's the problem. Imagine that her working for the folks out at Los Alamos are down out there at Area 51, and she's out there at the library talking about the great work, and she brings her father in, and there's taking questions, and think about that for a minute. These guys that have always worked some spook stuff, there are some
Yeah.
real classified stuff. Do you think how many people you think might wanna do her harm? What if you're in those arenas and you've been doing the right thing and
You think private or public or both?
no, I think retired people that have a lot of knowledge and a
And
lot
a
of
lot to lose.
like some of these people that are disappearing
Right.
and all the connections to JPL, and it makes me wonder if some of these people were also working some of these conscious angles, by the way, and it all goes back to some of that Crowley
Because
stuff, some of that
UAPs and consciousness are have been linked also, right?
mm,
Especially because there's maybe some kind of speculation, and I don't think that there could even really be speculation anymore. I did a podcast I was making a short with, a month ago with a woman, I think I told you this on the phone the other day, named, Dr. Lisa Gable, where she's, oh man, a neurobiologist,
mhm,
and she was working with the engineering professor to create like a EEG hat to use our neurons to control drones using EEG. And
mm,
she's doing this since 2010. They're flying drones around the gym with their minds, with their
yeah,
brains. And I'm like, this is 2010 in Lafayette University. That's some, and she was wonderful, awesome guest. I never heard, I never heard of anything like this
and
before.
your
I mean, so
DARPA's probably been doing it for another 10 or 20 years.
yeah, so there's speculation, especially because the UFOs seem often too small to be manned, really, as far from
Yeah,
our understanding and what we could guess. Which is also, by the way, completely preposterous because, like, the idea that like there's such thing as like a little intelligence, like, okay, I mean, like, I don't
absolutely.
suppose why not?
Now keep in mind, if you're Amy's dad, I have not talked to him about his death of Amy. That is just not a subject I would
Yeah,
ever bring up.
yeah,
But I did know she did have a lot of fibromyalgia stuff. She saw me one day when I met her I had an ice pack in my back, and had a lot of sciatica. She said, "So you suffer too with a lot of" I said, "Yeah, I travel with these ice packs everywhere. It sucks." She goes, "Well, that's the way it goes. People that are really doing real stuff, trying to make a difference, they seem to be plagued with something."
yeah,
And I didn't subscribe to that necessarily, but she certainly thought it was a burden for those who were making a difference. And I do think that there's a lot of stress and suffering that goes with that
mhm,
journey she was on for sure, because
sure,
she's truly shaking it up, man. Huntsville, Alabama, man. She's what do you what so I personally believe that something what happened to her, especially with her on any medicine with a drink, I think they would be just the perfect storm for people that are made to kill themselves different ways and threaten their families, they just say, "Hey, you're done anyways. If you wanna see your whatever live, this is what's gonna happen because we're done. You're done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's just the way to go down, man. It looks like a suicide, and it is for that. So I am skeptical. I don't believe that nobody who loves their parents and they're crazy about them would do that on the family farm.
Yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
that is nothing good. There's a lot of places you can go do that, but that wouldn't be my number 1 spot. That's just me. And I've seen in my own family, it was just a big mess. But, that was unfortunately, it was a very unfortunate young kid, but in a girlfriend deal. The point is that he didn't do that at home either. It's
Yeah.
unfortunate. He went to the cemetery. It's just this is all very dark
Sorry.
and horrible, horrible, horrible. Love
Yeah.
that kid. I'm just saying, man, I just don't buy it for the very reason of the relationship, how proud she was of her dad, and you don't do that as a party
Yeah.
thing for your dad or your mom. So they're very soft-spoken people, and they don't like trouble, and I think and in their minds, it could be that, but and it's an off-ramp because they've even said, "Well, unfortunately, scientists do die and some kill themselves." That's sort of their standard that's what they said recently. I think Fox tried to get in touch with them, and they said,
Yeah.
they said people scientists die too. So, they don't need any trouble. There was a lot of financially, it was tough to not have Amy out there keeping the business stuff going and the
Mhm.
meeting milestones and doing the paperwork. It was a lot of turmoil when that happened beyond her being gone. It's just
Yeah.
created it's a lot more complicated than people understand, and it's the kind of stuff that, can lead to bankruptcies and stuff, and, when you're in your retirement years, you don't wanna deal with all that.
Yeah, especially when your research is what keeps you going. I
Yes, sir.
mean,
That's it.
retirement's a death sentence as far as
Yeah.
anyone's concerned,
So,
you know?
yeah, but I've never in anything, even some of her texts to me, and there's a bunch. She said, will never. That's not. I'm not suicidal. She said that to if it's true, this Reddick stuff that came out from Sam Reed, I think it was that
Okay.
it was just a couple days ago. It said those were texts that were it went on Reddit. I screenshotted them all because
Yeah.
it disappears, but it's supposed to be text from Sam. Now, I met Sam as one of her, Canadian friends,
Mhm.
so I have asked him, I sent him a note, I said, is this real?"
Yeah.
I don't think I've heard back, but that was, earlier today. I really if it is, I mean, if he's sharing that, it's really interesting. You'd have to read it, and I
Yeah.
don't wanna and for the I don't want any trouble with Amy's I don't wanna create problems for them, but I will tell you this, you just stitch it together. How many people get to go out when people are retired who've done some really crazy stuff and have talent, and you're trying to commercialize them at the same
Yeah.
time, you're telling people, "We're gonna do some gravity energy stuff," and then it's like, those people are like, "Holy crap, I don't want you talking about that because that's gonna get me somebody's
Yeah.
gonna come visit us. Are you with me?" Somebody in the government, because that's not what you do when you retire working programs.
That's right.
I mean, if you
That's
were
right.
if you were running your mouth on base, and they'd probably take care of you if they had to. They have the right to protect the interests of national security, and that's the way it is. That's what we
There
have.
was a statue, I forgot what it was, from the 1950s, I think, that the government basically said they could just classify anything in the name of national security. They could privatize and classify anything in the name of national security.
Yep,
So, you're working on something fun, very cool, very nice, get a visit next door, knock, knock. Say, "Who is it?"
yeah, and it
You
might
everything you've
be
been working on, it's classified, you can never talk about it again.
yeah,
Have a nice life.
if you really wanna work in this area, we'll find you some work to do, but you need to sign something because you're getting too close to some things we're working on.
Yeah.
And it's a
Yeah.
fact. I mean, what else you gonna do, man? You're either top dog with the good toys to protect our interests, and I think there's a lot of cool toys that we can only imagine.
I know, and you know what? That's and that so your side and go looping back full circle before we call it a night, is when this goes into your sci-fi and when your reality is already so crazy,
Mm,
then, who knows what the heck is going on out there, for real.
well,
But I
there's
do you
something
maintain hope? Are you hopeful?
well, I am I mean, I think we're probably in the right country to
Yeah.
be the last to fall. I'm hopeful that we need our advanced propulsion so we can go to our own planet and do our own thing. I think that would be really good. I think people would be still collaborating and trying to take resources from this planet because it's so good.
Yeah.
So, I think we'd be dealing with crazies even that just come in or steal our water and to take whatever. Do you agree with that? I'm saying if you can get off this planet and have some pretty cool tech to do that, you probably got we've got a I now
It
understand
wouldn't be
they
5
did the
minutes before we annexed other planets. It would take us by the time you could sign your corporate, that deal that guarantees your shareholders X amount of returns from owning planet XYZ, you
that's
know,
yeah, and
that's how
it's
long it would take.
you know, when you get Hoover on your show, you need to ask him about the nature of water and life, and he's found it everywhere, everywhere. He's studied the moon rocks and some Mars, not a lot of Mars pictures. Haven't been any real good samples that have come back,
Uh-huh.
but the point is, he'll tell you a lot about how life could sustain millions of years under the water that never freezes
Wow.
the deep water and why the physics of that is such. Could be something that it's crazy. Ice worms that come alive from sunshine and
Wow.
they start basically sweating like glycol and it melts the ice local and then they freeze up adjacent microbes and stuff for it to eat. So these worms are like a piece of tubing and he was showing these
What?
absolutely, ice worms found deep in the Arctic, way under the ground. They pull cores, crazy. They come up and it's pretty cool, man. But he's got some great presentations he's done on. So, as far as life goes, yeah, you know, I think the dam is about to break in a lot of areas, and we are at a critical mass for technology where it's gonna be too easy for people to easily do destructive things, and I think somebody's gonna have to hit the brakes and, shy of destroying, regions completely. We've gotta have some policies and some I mean, I'm not saying the United Nations kinda got out of hand, and
Yeah.
you could see now that the agendas were not the people's agendas. They were some utopian for a small group of people that what they thought who are the ones that are gonna be here for the long term, who are the takers. So, you know that. I mean, it was going that way. So, there needs to be it seems like a United Nations to control weapons and all that, but they need to be a very open kimono existence.
Yeah.
Transparency. I'm gonna leave it at that on that, but man, I think I really believe that I believe that this is why they use the term demonic sometime. I think the dark forces of where information is coming from, the taxpayers are not gonna be happy with the answer, y'all. Not gonna like what they're doing. They're not gonna be happy with these methods to go and get information and be in these dark places and summon things that we don't really understand the physics. We use the word quantum and interconnected and it's all but the fact is there's not a filed system just sitting out in space saying, well, if you go to this vector, you'll get Tim Pickens' speeches for the last 100 years. I mean, are you with me? That's why people say it's a big holograph. It's a hologram. The thing about
Yeah.
holograms are if you see a picture, you can cut out a little quarter by quarter inch of that picture and it has all the details of the whole picture. No matter how small you make that. You know that, right? You cut it, you have all the details of the whole hologram.
I didn't know that.
Yes, pretty much to a degree, down to the point where you have the pixels stop making the image because it is photographic. Some of it's old photographic film, but the point is people see the universe as this three-dimensional hologram, and there's repetition of everything everywhere, sorta. Does that
Yeah.
make it
That's
kinda
it, yeah,
making
people
sense?
call that the that's, it's, not the looping universe. I forgot what it's called. I forgot what it's called. Yeah.
But I do believe that we could have a long talk about the origins of some of the history of the gods and the biblical writings. Before people existed, there seemed to be this evil in the world, in some cases, made by a creator who was omnipotent and knew everything, but yet these creatures that wanted free will, or he wanted them to have free will. There was quite an experiment that didn't work out, but it's
Yeah,
even mentioned in our Old Testament and in some of the writings of in other religions. So question is, were the battles of the planets, was there some reality to that when they
yeah,
were thrown out of paradise? But if you're gonna write a book to the people of planet Earth, why can we relate to creatures that aren't even beings? They're spiritual, or they are conscious. In other
yeah.
words, they're not
Entities.
bimodal people like
Yeah,
us. So the
yeah,
point is, why would you share that story with us? It's not as relevant as the people story, let's say, of the New Testament or others. All I'm saying is there's a lot of weird stuff that you could get into here, but I do believe our politicians are worried to death that this discussion about where some of this tech comes from, they really can't explain it.
yeah.
That's
That's a
what
tough
I think we're
conversation to have.
do you agree with that? It's all seems to be aligning, and they're like, "There's not a good answer, but you're not gonna like it."
Yeah, we have to see what I believe that comes out of any politician's mouth these days, but you
I
know what? Because even if they come out and show me, you know what? I don't believe crap anymore, and you know
well,
what? The blatant the degree of blatant lying is so to such an extent that it almost would require the most overwhelming evidence that, like, it would
yeah,
need, like
yes.
it would need, like, having a formal handshake in a photo op with a the interdimensional being for me to buy
Yeah.
Tim Burtrip or
Well,
what
yeah,
anyone
you're
else
right. You're right.
said.
I agree with you. And by the way, I think we're going to see some pictures and videos, and I think people are going to be able to explain them in different ways.
Yeah,
And
I know.
and you're not going to see a
And some's
living
gonna be bullshit and
alien.
some's gonna be amazing, and some's gonna be incredible.
I think it's gonna be mind-boggling, but it's not gonna be anything you can get your hands on, and I think, the grudges, you know, the people that think about it, the counterintelligence people that have come out as whistleblowers, are any of those people in jail, by the way? Not to my knowledge.
And all whistleblowers go to jail, right?
Yeah, so they're out running their mouth, and if they were really a threat, do you really believe they would be allowed to do that?
Yeah.
No, the
No.
point is they're out, they're counterintelligence, and they're out being fed some stuff, and they think they've got a platform, and it's clear with the one guy, Alonzo, it's clear that as long as he talks about aliens off the planet, he's in good shape. In other words, it's out there. It's not us.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
that's his space. Have you noticed?
Yeah, I have. I don't buy anything he says either, unfortunately. I mean,
Yes,
again, grain of salt, because I'm sure there's kernels of truth, but I don't buy a lot of what he says.
I agree with you.
Tim, I'm sorry I have to cut this, but my computer's on 2%. So I I really appreciate your time. I love your idea about doing a live Q&A podcast another time. I think that'd be a ton of fun. Or I'll gather up a bunch of questions and, we'll see what we could do with this. But I think that we could make something great, and I would love to have another conversation with you because, this is our 2nd or 3rd multi-hour conversation, and I'm really
Oh my
enjoying all of them.
gosh. Well, I'm sorry I'm so long-winded. You
No,
know,
this is great. I love this. I really this is the point of the podcast, and it's really been a ton of fun. So, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for all this awesome information, and it's so much fun. We covered so much ground. So,
yeah,
thank you.
and
This
by the
was a real
way, when you
gem.
come back, I'll give you a tour of the labs and all of my crazy stuff. Jetpacks, rocket bikes, it's all here, man.
I'm gonna I'll make a trip. I'll make a trip. My
That's
wife and
good,
I are looking
man.
for a place to go.
Okay.
Tim,
Well,
thank
it's
you so
really
much for
nice
the
to be on
time.
your show, and thank you again.
Of course. Have a great night. All the
Yeah, you
best. Take
too.
care,
Thank
man.
you. Take care,
Bye-bye.
man. We'll see you.